morning. Welcome back, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming here today on a rainy fall break day. I appreciate everyone being here. And we're halfway through the semester now, and I know you've been working very hard, and this academy has received a lot of attention from the Student Success Working Group, which is led by the provost. I'm sure you've heard about that before. And Joan is very interested in the work you've been doing, and I know that you've all been working very hard on your courses. And I personally appreciate everything that you've done. I know the university does too, and I know your students do too. So I think it's great that we come back together today and talk about where we are right now, what course corrections we might need to change between now and the end of the term, because there's still plenty of time, how we do that, and sort of looking ahead as, okay, at the end of the semester, what is that going to look like? What do we need to, what data do we pull together and say what worked and what didn't work? And in that vein, in your evaluation form last time, the thing that came across loud and clear is you wanted more time to share with each other all the things that are happening in your classroom, because that's what this is, professional learning community. It's an academy where you share ideas with each other and you create a knowledge base, shared understanding, and move forward, and then we can share that with the rest of the campus as well. So in that vein, we have an activity built around that to kick us out. So, Kurt?
Good morning, and again, like Garvey said, welcome to the middle of the semester meeting, and we're really happy to have you out here today. I should say that I have heard some, from talking with a number of professors, I've had several inquiries about exactly what it is that you're doing in the course of, since the beginning of the semester. And there is a lot of interest. People are beginning to say, what is a flipped classroom? What does that look like? What does interactive look like in a large class? And part of what we're doing today is designed to take a look at that idea. We want to really know what it is that you're doing, that you've looked at, that you're applying, and how that's working. So to do that, you've been given some Post-it notes. And on those Post-it notes, we'd like you to write your reflections, comments, and suggestions about the topics noted on the next slide. And just to give you an anticipation of what's going to happen, around the room we have 7 posters. Don't forget the one on the door over there. There is one of those posters on the door. And then 3 on the side wall. After you post your comments in response to the questions, we're then going to ask you to go around the room, post your Post-it notes in the appropriate places. Eventually we're going to take a look at those statements. We're going to do some summarizing and reporting back to the group. Does that make sense? So on your Post-it notes, we'd ask you to respond to the questions. Can everybody see the questions? That's the largest I could get it and still put it on one slide. Okay? So we'd like you to spend the first 5-7 minutes, okay, does that sound reasonable? Responding to those. You might want to put a number next to your written response so you know which poster it gets placed on. Just a thought for organization. Question number 1, and that, Garvey.
Obviously you can have more than one response per question.
Oh, absolutely. You can have as many as you want, and if you feel that, we'd like you to address all of these at least once, but if you have multiple responses to any one of the questions, go ahead and write that down. And when you're done, and I'll leave this up to you, I'll tell you when we've reached about the 8-minute mark. At that point, I'd like you to go put your Post-it notes on the boards around the group and tour the room and see what other people have said. Questions before you start? Go for it. When you're done, go ahead and post your notes, and retain your Post-it notes, the pad. don't be afraid to write additional comments as you start to visit the boards. And if you see something that you want to comment on, or if it jogs a memory, make sure you post that onto the sheet as well. The next step in this activity, please spend a little more time. Make sure you visit all the stations to look at the feedback that's been posted. I'll give you about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 7 minutes, and eventually I'd like you to go to the topic of your choice, form a group of 3 to 4 people to consider that topic. And I said 3 to 5 up there, 3 to 4, considering the numbers that we have. Eventually, we're going to ask you to report out your findings. And in reporting out your findings, we're going to ask you to do some prioritization. So what are the biggest takeaways that you see looking at the response sheets? And think about how that should be addressed, and then at the end of this session, we'll then make sure that we report that out to everybody in the group. What I'd like you to do now is to go to one of the posted issues, and I'd like you to summarize the recommendations. That's number 1. Add information if it's necessary, and be ready to report and discuss your findings and the implications with the Academy. So please let us know any surprises that you found in your data. Please let us know any questions that are raised, in addition to summarizing the comments that are up there. So you can editorialize a little bit in this activity. Okay, any questions before we begin?
We had number 7, which was the biggest payoff poster, which was probably the easiest poster to summarize, really, in hindsight. We found a trend that sort of went from one to the next. So we came up with a Venn diagram to do our final thing. The one on the left, I know you can't read it, but it says support and colleagues. A lot of people talked about how they really enjoyed seeing people from other colleges, other departments, other disciplines, and hearing that it's not just them having these issues with large classes. And a couple people wrote about how it's not just, it's like being alone together now, because they have people they can talk to and resources from the people. And then we kind of saw this trend into best practices. So teaching techniques, small group stuff, learning how to engage students, very specific types of practices being provided. And then into the resources that have been provided as well. So some of them were really concrete. A couple people wrote down the Moodle page. They talked about things that they heard here at these specific sections or sessions about things that they could do with techniques. So that trend seemed to be, I thought of a snake first, but then we worked into a Venn diagram because everything sort of led together. And oh, is it too far away? You said 2 feet. Okay. All right. 1 foot is the new thing. All right. So that's it. Now you got it. Nothing on there, but there you go. All right. Did I miss anything? I don't think so. I mean, they were pretty uniform, which didn't surprise me, to be honest. I mean, all the things that I had thought about were here, right? Except for the Moodle page. I need to spend more time on the Moodle page.
Well, Marcus and I looked at this poster and we agreed to disagree. So I'm going to have Marcus go first and then I'll contradict him.
No, basically we figured out that the grading is pretty much all over the place between A and D, that instructors tend to give themselves a slightly higher grade than they expect the students to give them. And that was pretty much it.
Well, those are the points we agreed on. But what Marcus doesn't like is the ABC scheme, which I fully agree with him. My point was that what students would grade us as, if they were restricted to the letter grade scheme, as we are, unfortunately, that to a large degree there is a correlation between what the student would grade you as an instructor, or the course as, assign a letter grade to the course, correlates with what we assign to student, the distribution of the letter grade. So if our average is a C, I would think that what the students would think of a course would be a C. This is where the disagreement came, and I'll pass the floor to him.
And I can only speak out of personal experience. I'm teaching one of the challenging introductory organic chemistry classes, and typically we have relatively high DFW rates. And having grown as a teacher from a pretty tough first year, I still haven't, unfortunately, been able to change those DFW rates, despite trying a lot of different techniques learned in various academies and workshops here on campus. However, my student evaluations are pretty good. They're at least average, or most of the time actually above the average of the college or the department for my teaching. So I don't see, at least in my section of this class, this correlation between the grades that I give to the students and the grades, if I were to put those comments into grades for my students.
All I have to say is not everybody is as good as you are, Marcus. So.
I'm not saying that this applies to everyone. I'm not saying that I'm perfect and that great, but I've really worked hard on that. And one of the reasons why I've worked so hard on that, because I started as an untenured professor here, and after the first semester, my chair took me aside and said, I know you teach well. I've observed you actually a couple of times myself. But you need to do something about the student evaluations if you want to get tenure here. And not only that, as I said, I want to change those DFW rates, and I've changed the way that I teach dramatically after my first semester, without seeing the effect, a large effect on the DFW rate. But however, I do see a lot of appreciation from the students who even fail my class. A lot of them come back over time and tell me they learned a lot in my course despite failing. And one of the issues that they really appreciate was learning how to learn and apply that in the future. And several of the students who did fail the first time come back to my section of this class and do succeed the next time. Maybe not with that A or B that they need for medical school, but they will succeed.
To end with a positive note, which is where we agreed, that pertains to the quote-unquote unfairness of letter grades. And maybe this is something for next academies to how do we revise our grading scheme. That's probably some area of improvement.
And our group, we decided from the results, we had more group work with assigned leaders, communication outside of class. There was more discussion in class and outside of class, and more interaction. Someone put down blogging, and then more team and individual problem solving. And there was better feedback or more feedback from the clickers and in-class discussion. And as a result, there was better attendance.
Okay, we had several themes that emerged loud and clear on our sticky notes. First one was a lot of people commented on things were working pretty well for most of the students, but how do you get the really chronically uninvolved students to buy in? The ones who are still arriving late, leaving early, not attending, refusing feedback, just not getting into the activities. And what do you do with that group? Because in a large class, that can be a fairly substantial group. Time management was the other really big issue, as far as if you're going to add in group activities and such, what do you take out? And kind of related to that, a couple of people mentioned that students can't get enough of the content on their own to really get the maximum benefit out of classroom activities, because you can't necessarily trust that they're going to read the textbook on their own and understand it well enough to come in prepared for the activity. A couple other things. Getting students to use available help. You may offer tutors, TA office hours, your own office hours. Freshmen tend to never come to those. All three of us kind of had the same experience that people had written about here. Developing a variety of engaging tasks to use in class and keep students on task. And then a couple of very concrete points. Several people mentioned the need for more TA assistance in grading and putting grades on Moodle and running activities, and also the need for more or better classroom space if you're going to do breakout activities.
All right, we basically saw, I'm going to actually stand on this side. We basically saw two major areas that our comments kind of fell into. One of them being issues really related with design, particularly what we call the articulation of outside and in-class activities. So a better correspondence with that castle top diagram. And then our second group was based upon technology. And it was less about what I wouldn't use again and more about what I would use again. And that even included things like open source textbooks, as well as clickers and that type of thing. Walking students through the technology, spending the time that takes in order to do that. So those were our two main areas. And basically just in general, more time. So we'd like an extension, please. At least my interpretation was more about the design piece as opposed to what students were not. Now, some of these may have been paired with the ones over there saying, hey, students aren't doing their job. Or don't know how to do it, or those types of things. So just from what was written up here, it was more about it sounded more like what the faculty member would have liked to have been able to do in terms of the design. That was.
There were 4 themes that we were able to actually work through. First is that it was largely reported that groups seem to be working, but that it's critically important in terms of recommendations to explain to students why they're doing group work, and that it's not enough to just say that at the beginning of the semester, that every time you introduce a group activity or any kind of peer-to-peer learning, you remind students why they're engaging in that kind of work. Also, just to kind of free yourself and realize that you can't please them all. You'll have some students who are just recalcitrant and don't enjoy peer-to-peer learning, don't enjoy group work. Do the best that you can with that. Also, emphasize time on task. If you tell students that they're going to do something in a group or some kind of think, pair, share activity, being very clear that they have 10 minutes to do something or 7 minutes to do something, and show them a countdown like we're doing here, or use a timer where you can regularly tell them how much time they have left and how that actually gets more quality engagement during the activity. And also that the group work and peer-to-peer learning helps them stay more present, more awake, more engaged than sort of just sitting and hearing you lecture or perhaps looking at something in class. The second thing was that there are some technological issues that are definitely impacting our teaching. A lot of it has to do with issues in our smart classrooms. You get there, you've got 15 minutes, you need to set up, things aren't working, issues around rebooting, all of that. And so we talked about the need to communicate early with classroom support, certainly to develop a relationship, but also so that they understand how we're using our classrooms and what we're doing to make sure that our stuff is up and running. Talked about how if you're having any e-trials of books or materials for students, you really need to confirm their availability long before the class begins. Because if the materials aren't going to be available, you need to have a contingency plan and backup plan to support the student learning. And also that it might be important to communicate with your departments about getting training for faculty, particularly part-timers, on how to use the smart podium and the technology in the classroom. A lot of our departments are hiring a lot more part-timers who have not gotten that basic skills development, and it impacts us in that 15-minute turnover slot that we have. Third, grades seem to be either consistent or better using some of the new techniques. We find that it's critically important to set parameters for students in order to facilitate them meeting with you. If you say to students, come to my office hours, they might not come. But if you say, if your grade is below X number of points, please make an appointment with me. If you are at this percentage below the class average, please come meet with us. And we see that there's an uptick in students coming to office hours as a result of that. And lastly, there was an issue around a small number of students who are not internalizing the course readings well, or who are either unwilling or unable to do the work that's assigned. So in terms of recommendations, we first talked about figuring out how to incentivize the activities, tying these things significantly to points or to the grade structure so that students realize they cannot pass your course with a reasonable grade without engaging in those kinds of activities. Considering group work, since group work seems to be receiving high marks, maybe you can figure out how to incorporate that into your course to get students to become more willing to engage. You might need to back up and actually do some skill building with your students. Maybe they aren't doing the reading because they don't know how to approach the readings that you've assigned for the course. So instead of assuming that they have the skill set or being frustrated that they aren't demonstrating it, teaching them how to do the work that you want them to do or demonstrating that. And if you don't feel proficient in that, bringing someone in to actually do a quick workshop on study skills or reading or any of those kinds of things, so that your students have the right kind of accountability and support structure in place to do the work. So those were our 4 areas that we were able to get through.
Good morning. We have some clusters of Post-its here, a very prominent cluster here around early feedback and early alert, which we assume most people said was positively affecting the course, although one said it was only doing so minimally. We have a lot focusing on regular quizzes and writing assignments more often in class. We have some on clickers, using clickers to get more feedback in the course. This is about the writing. Some people have been very proactive. Maybe we were a little bit even surprised how proactive some have been in asking students to come to their office after the first test if they were struggling, talking to students early about their attendance and things like that. But those were our main clusters of Post-its. Anything else?
Let me tell you very briefly about what the class is and how I used to teach it, and then I'll tell you about the changes I've made. The class is one of these big Gen Ed classes, LBST 2101, Western Cultural and Historical Awareness. And what the class looks at is epidemics. And it does so, kind of the broad general goal is to study epidemics, infectious diseases over time, to see how kind of a lot of the same things keep happening over and over, so that we can come to the 21st century and go, wow, some of the things maybe we're doing are a little bit different, but we can see the roots in what we're doing in the past. And then also some of the things we're doing are exactly like we've been doing for the past 1,000 years or so. And because the class regularly enrolls between 150 to 200 students, depending on the classroom we can get, for the first, I think, probably 15 times I taught it. I taught it largely as a lecture. I did not talk at them for an hour and 15 minutes. I would bring in video clips, and we would have great Q&A sessions. And I was a pretty decent lecturer. It's easy to be an interesting lecturer when you get to talk about syphilis and leprosy and plague and that sort of thing. And you find the great YouTube clips. And I mean, my favorite is when I do syphilis and I show them a chancre in the mouth, and they all go, oh, and I tell them, you need to thank me. I had to spend hours looking for something in the mouth, because I realized if I had the slide up here of some other place, that's all you would see. That would be burned in your brain, and you would not be able to listen to me for the rest of the class. And the class did okay. Not a huge DFW rate, but I had students who were getting Ds, who were getting Fs, who were getting Ws. And the way that I look at it is, this isn't chemistry or calculus. This isn't a weed out class. If you do the readings, if you come to class, you may not make an A in my class, but you should certainly be able to pass it, and not all the students did. Well, this summer at the Academy, when Dee Fink was talking, things that had been in the back of my brain that I kind of knew but was not explicitly aware of, I had this aha moment of, do I really care if my students 2 years from now remember that Ronald Ross is the person who discovered this, and that leprosy is caused by a bacteria, virus, fungus? Who cares about that 2 years from now? Really, I wanted them to learn these bigger issues. And what I had been spending most of my time in class doing and testing them on were those smaller content issues. Because the way I graded, I did not have a TA before this semester. I graded 3 multiple choice exams, and then I would give them a final essay exam, and they would fall short on the final essay exam. Not surprisingly, because I had not modeled, we had not talked about stuff throughout the semester. And so I decided to give team-based learning a shot. You probably remember I was one of the people who said, that's a great idea, but I'm really nervous about doing this in a class of 150. I first want to say, do not try this without at least one TA, if not more. I would be drowning in work if I did not have a TA right now. But what we do in the class is I usually spend about 2 days on a disease. It used to be about a week on a disease. And the first part of the first class would be me talking about the basic biology. Then we would do the second half of the class, some historical example. And usually the next class was another, probably more contemporary, closer in time, historical example. They also had one reading a week, usually an article or a chapter from the book that related to what we talked about. So the changes I've made with team-based learning. I have taken that basic biology and I've offloaded it so they're supposed to do it outside of class. They have a Moodle lesson where I tell them exactly what you're supposed to know: the infectious agent, the route of the mode of transmission, what are the symptoms, can it be treated, if there's other important stuff that is necessary for them to understand the history, then they need to know that also. I tell them what it is. I will also go and point them towards credible web pages, because one of the things I realize I want them to learn to do is learn how to navigate the web so they can filter out the good stuff from the junk. And so they are supposed to do that. They have also been placed in permanent teams. And we come to class and they're given one of these team readiness assessment tests. I ordered those little scratch-off sheets that we used. I had our department order them. And let me back up. Also for their readings, I give them an online Moodle reading quiz, which next time I teach the class, we're going to do with clickers in class. And then they have some combination of some of the basic biology that I know they need to have kind of wrapped their minds around to do their team-based challenge, and then some reading questions that they've previously seen on their individual quiz. They take that as a team. Then sometimes I will give them a short 15, 20-minute lecture. Sometimes we launch right into the activity. And then they have what are team-based challenges. And let me give you an example of one of our weeks, so this makes a little more sense for you all. For malaria, they had the biology of malaria they learned about online, outside of class. Then they came to class and took a team readiness assessment test that tested them on the biology. They had also read an article about how when Europeans came to the Carolinas and started to settle it, they pursued rice farming as one of their main strategies. And rice farming changed the environment in such a way to make it more favorable for malaria. And so they had a quiz on that. Then I gave them a lecture about how in sub-Saharan Africa, with the advent of agriculture, they changed the environment in such a way that it made things more favorable for malaria, and that's when malaria became a really significant health problem. Then later on in class, they saw a 20-minute video clip about gold mining in the Amazon, which is going on today. Didn't talk about malaria at all. It was just, a very brief clip of gold mining. And their team-based challenge was, you've been hired by the Pan American Health Organization. They're very concerned that malaria will become a problem in areas where these illegal gold mines are popping up. They're taking a novel approach of hiring historians, hoping to learn from the mistakes we've made in the past to prevent them from happening again in the future. And so your team of historians needs to talk about what things were done in the past, and it was worded a little bit more sophisticated than this, what things were done in sub-Saharan Africa that led to an increased burden of malaria in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Carolinas. How do you see this going on in the Amazon today? And what suggestions would you have for kind of preventing malaria from becoming a problem? So it required them to kind of think about what they had read about in the past, see how it was going on in the present, and basically you could see there's deforestation, there's migration of non-immunes into an area, there are these huge pools of standing water because of how they do the mining, there's no netting on windows. You could see all of this stuff, and they had to come up with their own solutions. Think about, if this is what's going on, how do we fix it? When we did plague, they were hired by Warner Brothers to write the prequel for Contagion, which was set in Europe in the 1700s. But they needed to be able to protect themselves from critics, because one critique of historical dramas is, oh, that's inaccurate, that could never have happened. So every part of their plot, they needed to be able to say, well, that either happened during the first or the second plague pandemic, which they had read about or we had talked about in class. So this is the type of thing we're doing. It's still kind of early. Two big problems that I'm having. One is my time management. I don't always have enough time in that class to then I'd like to try to have 3 or 2 groups come up and share their answer. so that students can see, and I don't always have time to do that. I'm still working on my time management. It's not them, it's me. And also the group sizes are too large. I put them because I have 150, put them in groups of 8, which gives me 19 groups. And they turn in their assignments and we give them quick grades on this. And I just thought I would much rather have 19 than, I don't know what the math comes out to, like 30 groups, because that's less work for the TA. Groups of 8 are just too large in the classroom. Most groups that stay in the classroom, some groups get up and go move and work elsewhere for the allotted time and then come back. But when you've got 4 people, the folks on the end can't really hear one another, so the next time I do it, there will be groups of 6. So, and I've liked what I've heard so far. I've heard students bringing in material from other classes. I've heard students linking back to previous discussions. I've heard students come up with really crazy, but it shows me that they're thinking. One of the solutions to mining in the Amazon was to have herds of cattle around the gold mines. And that sounds crazy, but in the article on rice farming in the Carolinas, they talked about how the fact that settlers in the Carolinas did not pursue cattle ranching on a large scale contributed to malaria, because cattle would have provided alternate blood meals instead of biting us. Mosquitoes could have bitten the cattle. And it sounded far-fetched, but I thought, you've read and you're able to think critically, and sure, it's not going to actually happen, but they know this. And I was really excited to hear that. You know, one group for the script decided to do a version of A Bug's Life, which is an animated cartoon, but they were doing it on fleas. You know, from the perspective of the flea was what their script was.
Well, how much time do you have in the classroom?
An hour and 15 minutes. Well, and sometimes we do run into problems where I realize I've got 10 minutes and it's really not enough to have a lot of people report out. So I'm still working on the time management part of it.
Are the groups required to meet outside of class?
They're not required to, but some of them are, which is, you know, I've set up a team forum where they can communicate, and they don't know that I get the emails also. And so I see some of them doing that. Some of them for the first exam I know studied together outside of class. They came to my office as a group with some questions. So no, they're not required to work outside of class. I just thought time management, and I can't make it, was too much, but some of them are doing it.
The first part you were saying about the team readiness assessment that was based on their text readings and the stuff that you had posted on Moodle. Did you say you did that with clickers?
No, I would like to do an individual readiness assessment test beforehand, so you don't just get to coast with your team, so that you will get some points for how well you do on your own, but then you get together as a group and make sure that everyone does actually know this basic information that you need to know in order to do the team readiness or the team-based challenges.
Okay, so the first one's individual grade?
Yeah, and right now it's done in Moodle outside of class. And it is, I do it to incentivize them to actually read, to not show up thinking, oh, my group members have this, to try and get them all to come to class having read and having thought about these issues.
And then my second question was, what do you do about students if you have pre-formed permanent teams? If you have a student that's absent, do they just...
We spent one day in class working on team contracts, where I tried to very clearly tell them there are going to be a few folks in this team or in this class who don't pull their weight. Now is when you set up some very clear rules, clear definitions of what you expect from students, from your teammates in terms of participation, a protocol for dealing with it if somebody is not pulling their weight, because I told them you don't just get to out of the blue say you're kicked out, and clear consequences. And they also had to do things like think about roles on the team and communication strategies on the team. And so that's what we did. I'm going to, one of my issues with time management is we haven't gotten to this yet, even though it's been on the agenda a couple of times, is have them anonymously provide things that I think you do well in the group, things I would like to see you do more of, and have them anonymously fill this out for each student in the group. And then those students are going to get the feedback. So they're going to know what their teammates think about their contributions, the good and the bad. And I haven't had any, I've got one group where I've encouraged them, where I continually see only 6 people and I know they have 8. And I've told them, I can't do anything about this until you notify me, until you start following the steps in your protocol. And they haven't done it. So I guess it's not bothering them that much. If I was in that group, I would be on my iPhone right when you're saying this, sending me an email. But it doesn't bother them enough to do anything about it.
One more question, John.
So the question about the pre-quizzing for individual versus group. So how do you balance the exams or individual grades? So how do they understand the things that they're graded on as individuals vis-a-vis the work in the group? I'm just sort of curious, the grading scheme and how much weight is in group work and how the work they do in the groups prepares them for the exam materials.
Okay, so your question, how do they understand their grades? It's very clear in the syllabus. We talk about it. The team stuff is worth a little bit less than the individual work overall. And how does it prepare them for the tests? A lot of the questions on the quizzes are very close to, if not, what shows up on the midterm. And the issues that we're dealing with in class, the team-based challenges, are preparing them for the essay exams. I've now added 2 essay exams. And so one of the essay exams was about how does the way we interact with our environment lead to increased disease burdens. And they actually had 2 or 3 examples that they could have chosen to support that. Another one was politics and disease. And there were a couple of things they could have chosen from.
So what I decided to do, I thought it was super fun using these little scratch-off things when we first did it. And I wanted to add a lot of group activities into my course. So previously in the past, it was pretty much a straightforward lecture course. And I did have quizzes. They were just OpScan quizzes at the beginning or end of class, pretty standard. So what I've done this semester is I have 6 quizzes throughout the semester. I got students to also form permanent teams for the whole semester, and I did groups of 6, so I had 30 teams, and that size seems to work pretty well. And they've had other group activities that they do with their teams as well. For the quizzes, I've assigned a chapter from the textbook for each quiz that they're responsible for reading before the class. And then when we get to class, they do both an individual quiz and a group quiz with the IFAT sheet. And they do those back to back. So the individual quiz is still the standard quiz with the OpScan stuff. They hand that in, and then they get together with their groups right afterwards and redo the exact same quiz with the IFAT sheet. So there's 6 quizzes, they're all worth 15%. Those 2 grades are averaged throughout the semester. So if you bomb the individual quiz, I got a lot. I'm going to be showing you some feedback that I got from students. They really like that they're able to improve their grade with the group quiz. And so what I did last Thursday, I've got a morning section at 9:30 and an afternoon section. My morning section is really keen. They all show up. The attendance is much better than the afternoon section. So I just handed out some index cards. I love index cards this semester. It's really easy to get feedback. And I asked them 2 questions. So I'm just going to show you some quick data that I got back from that. So first, before you look at this slide, and I'm just going to bring that up in a second. So the first question, the first question that I'll talk about was, I asked them, the point of doing these IFAT quizzes is to help you improve your retention of the material for the midterms and the finals that I give later on in the semester. And also, it's supposed to improve your test-taking skills. So how you do multiple choice tests, your comprehension of the questions, and so on. So do you think this is occurring? Yes or no? Simple yes or no. So this is not what's shown here, but 75% of the kids said yes. I love it, I like the quizzes, and 25% said no, although they still had some good things and some bad things to say about the quizzes. The second question, and this is the data that I'll show you now. So the second question I asked them, what is the best part of doing the quiz with your group, and what is the worst part of doing the quiz with your group? So this is number of responses. It doesn't necessarily correlate with number of students because some students put several responses. These 4 are the most common best parts of doing these group quizzes, and these 4 are the most common worst parts. So by far, they love being able to talk and collaborate with one another. And so that's the collaboration discussion response. Most of them put, whenever they put, I like to discuss or I like to collaborate, they said it helps me understand the material better. So I understand why the answer is right. I understand why my answer perhaps was wrong that I put on the individual quiz. They really like improving their grade. Instant feedback was 1. It wasn't as high as I thought it would be. And team can know what you don't know. So again, that's kind of part of the discussion thing. The worst parts were unequal participation and members unprepared. So kind of, a lot of people put the other members didn't read the chapters, some members didn't show up. Sometimes it was only one person kind of directing the show and doing the quiz for everybody else. Disagreements were another really common thing. So having arguments and not agreeing, and some people felt that their response wasn't actually put on the quiz. And then a small proportion put that it might lower their grade. What I do so I think Coral got this question, what I do for having people actually present and getting grades, I just get them to put their initials, so the date and the initials in pencil on the back of the IFAT sheet every time they do it. So then I only give grades to those students who are actually there that time. And then other responses, they liked helping so best responses, they liked helping each other with the material, learning from mistakes without large consequences. They liked challenging each other's answers until they got the best one. And then some of the other worst parts can be confusing because of different opinions. They get annoyed, I think, when they make mistakes in the individual quiz, and then they see where they made the mistake later on with the IFAT sheet, or they feel like they made careless mistakes. Having to get up and walk in the class, this person didn't like that. I also like this one, it's annoying. I think the best part was something like, it's fun, or it's easy. I like this one, it's a quiz, that's the worst part. And that's it. So getting the answers wrong, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's been my experience. I think generally from that response that I got, that 3/4 of the students really like it and think it's doing a good job. And it's changed the dynamic of the class. So it's been really good. And I put those same questions on the midterms, some of the same questions. And they generally, obviously, do pretty well on those. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you typically have a significant withdrawal in your course?
This semester is actually, so I've implemented.
Not this semester, historically, because I want to ask a follow-up question.
Historically, I've taught, this is my 3rd year teaching the course, and my withdrawal rate is better this semester than it's been in the past. But for the other sections, I think there are maybe like 8 or 9 sections of the course, maybe a little bit less, 5 or 6. I don't really know. Yeah.
So my follow-up question was going to be if you're making permanent teams, how will the withdrawal rate that's approaching impact those permanent teams? But if you don't have a significant number, then it probably won't.
Well, they only get, so if those students withdraw, it doesn't really impact the group grade. So you're thinking, so teams would end up with no members, for instance, or?
We would have less people per team.
Yeah. But I think, with a number of 6 people, like the likelihood of that reducing, any one team going down to 1 or 2 is low, because, so I don't think it would really affect it that much. Yeah.
How have you seen this impact attendance and grades? Have you seen a difference?
For the quizzes are definitely better because they're averaged from the individual and the group. They're definitely better, although some of the kind of logistical things I've gotten from students is that the chapters are too long and the quizzes are too short. So they're not sure what material to focus on. I did spend half a lecture modeling how best to read a textbook chapter to give them some background on that before they got started on this. The midterm grades were about the same as they were in previous years. So, yeah. I don't have a TA with me in the class, so I do walk around a little bit, but I can't really give you any individual observations on them. It varies. There's some groups where everyone is super quick and they get the IFAT done very rapidly and they hand it in. And some groups really love working together and they sit down, they move from their seats and they sit down elsewhere in the classroom. And I do know that some groups are working together to study for the midterm outside of class as well. I think it probably varies. We have 30 groups, so there's probably a lot of variability.
I'm glad to be here and to see you all and to share some of the things I've been doing in terms of early intervention. I teach a LBST 1101 Arts and Society course that's focused on dance. It's a challenge to teach that course because it is a general education course, but I'm in the dance department and our dance majors and minors have also been encouraged by our undergraduate advisor to take that class. So I definitely feel like I'm stretched a little bit in terms of trying to serve the general interest of students who might not give 2 cents about dance, as well as those students who are very much interested in the major or minor and need some foundational knowledge of the discipline in order to move forward. So that's a real challenge. The other challenge is that I have a lot of returning adult students in that class, several of whom are old enough to be my parents, which they like to remind me of. I've had a lot of returning veterans and all of that, so I'm dealing with students who are really across the spectrum in terms of their levels of awareness, levels of interest, and developmental needs, which is a real challenge for me. So in terms of some of the early interventions and feedback that I've been building into the course, I found that when we did the Castle Top activity early on in the academy, what became very clear to me very quickly is that I needed to be covering less content. I love my content. I love dance. It makes me happy. I see it everywhere. I love my field. I think it is relevant and interesting and will probably save the world. But I can't infuse all of that content into a 1,000 level general education course, and I shouldn't force myself to try to do that. So once I really clarified what the goals of the course were and worked through the Castle Top design, I realized that by covering less content, I could actually infuse more quality materials and engagement into the course. So I introduced discussion much more early in the class. I have 2 very large sections of about 175 students each, in addition to a small honors seminar on comparative world dance. So in the 2 very large LBST courses, I introduced discussion very early. And one of the things that I found is that students had been in class with professors who wanted to use discussion, but they didn't really know what a discussion was, how you prepare for a discussion, what a discussion is supposed to mean or do. So just taking 5 minutes before we engage the activity to explain to students what a discussion is, what the expectations are in terms of how you participate in one, and how you prepare for a discussion was really critical. And I used Stephen Brookfield's writing, Discussion as a Way of Teaching. If you Google that, you can actually find it, the entire document is a free PDF. So I have that, and I reference that a lot in preparing for class. Along those same lines, skill building was critically important. And now that I am teaching less content, I have more time to build in some of those additional skills that my students need. Because I have students who are all over the map developmentally, I can't really make assumptions about what they know how to do or what their prior academic preparation has been. So like the previous presenter, I do spend time early on in the semester to teach the students how to approach the reading materials that I use for the class. We do not have a standard textbook. I'm drawing from at least 19 different sources in terms of readings, which means that some of the things they will read are things that I've taught to graduate students. I'll teach my students whatever material they need in order to master the concepts. I don't care about, well, you can't teach this to undergrads, or undergrads can't deal with primary sources. Yes, they can if we teach them how to do it. So I do spend time teaching students how to approach the readings, strategies and techniques for reading. I actually spend some time really just surveying them informally and talking to my students. A lot of my students are working. A lot of them are double majors and minors, many of them even traditional age. And I was like, maybe, I don't know if this is a Southern thing or not, but this is the first institution I've ever been in where a lot of my traditional age students are already married and have children. They're working sometimes 2 jobs, sometimes a job and a half. That's critically important information for me to know in terms of how I structure the course. It doesn't mean that I have lowered the standard of what I teach, but I did take 15 minutes out of one of my classes to teach them a time management technique that I use in my very own life to help them figure out how to organize their time so that they can participate and stay in my course. I want low DFW rates, which means they need to learn how to successfully manage all of those commitments in order to maintain a presence in the class. Technical support. I use Moodle quite heavily. A lot of my students, Moodle was very new to them, or they used it in other classes, but a lot less than they use it in my course. So pulling it up, walking through how you get the readings, how you participate in the online forums, here's where you click to get the quiz. I mean, all the stuff that I think is obvious is not obvious to at least half of my students. So really building in the time to engage that. I've also brought in representatives from some of the various student support units in my class. So since we have 16 weeks, I break it up into 4 4-week units. At the end of each 4-week unit, my students have a quiz. There's always a review day. The first 15 minutes of review day, there is a presentation of some kind, either from the University Center for Academic Excellence, Career Services, Counseling Services, whoever I need to bring in. And part of the reason why I do that is because my first years get all of that at SOAR, but it's entirely overwhelming, and they don't remember SOAR by the time I get them. And I've also found, you know, this is my 2nd year at UNC Charlotte, but it's my 8th year teaching in higher ed. And in my experience, students wait entirely too late to ask for the kind of support that they need. So reminding them regularly that these resources are available, reminding them that most of it is free, and free should always be in the budget. And reminding them as well that students who are successful, it's not because they're somehow naturally smarter or naturally better than you, but that 9 times out of 10, they figured out how to leverage the available resources in order to be successful. I've even modeled to my students, they know that I'm in the academy, they know that I go to teaching and learning, they know that I go to conferences and workshops to build my skills. So it normalizes this whole thing of we're all learning, we're all growing, we're all pursuing and moving forward in terms of being better learners, including myself. I've introduced low stakes writing throughout my course. And the low stakes writing is really good for me because it's a sneaky way for me to get evaluation all the time. My students do some low stakes writing every week. It's an online reflection activity. The most questions that they've ever had to respond to are 3. And these are inquiry-based, inquiry-guided kinds of questions, how and why questions. I participated in the Communication Across the Curriculum Institute in the spring, so I'm infusing that sort of inquiry-based learning into the low stakes writing. But one of those questions is always something evaluative about the class or the content or my teaching or the structure of the course. So yes, they have a midterm survey that they'll do this week. Yes, I did sort of an informal, what I call a start, stop, continue. What would you like to see us start doing? What do you think we should stop doing? What should we keep doing at the end of the first 4 weeks? But I'm getting regular feedback all the time in these low stakes writing activities without saying, give me feedback. And all of that's incentivized in a part of their grade. So I make sure that you can't pass my class without doing the low stakes writing so that I can get them engaged in that activity and also so that I get the feedback that I need. Thank you. Are there any questions? Mm-hmm. I did 15 minutes. Yeah, I try to break up, I have 75 minutes twice a week, and I try to break my course up into 15-minute chunks, whether it's 15 minutes that I'm doing a mini lecture, and then maybe they're doing a group activity, and maybe we're doing some kind of reflective learning audit. I really try to vary what I'm doing or the methods of instruction every 15 minutes or so. And I just planned to build in one of those 15-minute chunks as a time management day. I taught them a technique called the Sunday meeting, and several of them have actually emailed me that they're doing it, so it's exciting.
The reduction in content.
Yes.
Do you think you can still make a fair comparison and improve student attention between the past and present?
You know, and I think I should say that differently. I think it's less so much a reduction in content and more so that I'm emphasizing different things in my teaching. It's less important to me that they know that Catherine de' Medici brought Italian folk dance to the French court, which set the stage for ballet. That's not important to me. What's important to me is that they know the difference between folk forms and classical forms and the history of classical movement vocabularies. So it's less about it's not so much about less content as much as it's about focusing on the more critically important concepts that I want them to be able to master, whether they are dance majors or whether they're students who have sort of a passing interest in dance. My department is a little bit miffed at me because my course is largely the reason why our number of dance minors has skyrocketed, because people who think they aren't interested in dance find that they are, so we've had to figure out how to cap the minor. It's like, yeah, stop making them like dance. But, you know, so part of it is just about figuring out what's really important. The Castle Top activity was really hard for me. I felt a lot of anxiety doing that in the academy because I felt like it was making me cut out the things that I love about my discipline. But what it's made me do more is focus on what's critically important for them to learn at this level. And so in that regard, I do think I can make a pretty fair comparison. Stephen Brookfield, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Brookfield, B-R-O-O-K-F-I-E-L-D, and it's Discussion as a Way of Teaching. He has a second PDF as well, I'm not sure, but if you Google him, you'll find it, and it has wonderful prompts and peer-to-peer learning activities and discussion techniques, and it's been helpful.
Can you put your time management technique talking points on Moodle for us?
Yes, and I can actually tell you that the Sunday meeting comes from Carrie Ann Rockmore's work, R-O-C-K-Q-U-E-M-O-R-E. And she is the director for the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. She's author of the book, The Black Academic's Guide to Winning Tenure Without Losing Your Soul. It's not just for black people. It's not. Please get a copy. I would encourage you to get a copy. And there's a whole chapter on Sunday meeting. So yeah, I'll post that material. I'm happy to share it. It's been critically important to me as a junior faculty member in terms of learning how to reduce the time I spend on teaching preparation, find time to do my research, meet my service commitments, take my weekends off, and still have a life in Charlotte while figuring out how to pay back my student loans. So the time management piece has been critically important to me, and I saw that it was necessary to share with my students.